All right. Well, welcome to our Calpads network meeting for March 15th, 2022. If you're checking your email this morning, I'm sure you just got the Calpads update that the deadline, still this Friday. So we have a very concise agenda today, and I'm not going to waste any time. We'll just jump right in because I know this is a busy and stressful week for a lot of people. So the agenda for today, and Jaime, would you mind just dropping our links in the chat? You probably already did. There you go. You're on top of it. I didn't question you. Sorry. The agenda for today, we're just do a quick welcome and housekeeping, and then we're just going to do Calpads regional meeting to recap some of the highlights and just some clarifications and ask some clarifying questions of the network members. And then there are some additional questions or additional proposed changes that were shared earlier. Actually, this was last week through the CDE's Calpads County Office User Group that I participate in, and that's kind of the idea here. They provide these ideas or proposed changes, and we get to run them by you and then get feedback. And in this case, we're actually, the timing will work out. Usually you get those surveys we send out with no background. This time I can actually give you some background so you'll know what you're responding to in the surveys. And then we have our vendor breakouts. And just a reminder, the vendor breakouts are going to be separate. There's a separate page. It's in our Canvas agenda. The page will take you to those vendor breakouts, and those vendor breakouts will start, SIS vendor breakouts will start upon completion of our content. So I think the majority of our LEAs have their SIS vendor will be represented. And of course, there's always some who don't participate. So I apologize in advance for that, but we still keep trying and inviting everybody. So anyways, let's dive right in. Here are in your Canvas, what we've got loaded in there for the agenda. There are a number of links, including the resources, the slides for today. And I do recommend downloading the slides. We've actually tagged them this time with who should see these slides in terms of people in your LEA, who should be aware of these things. So it's just a part of the process we like to emphasize. It's getting everybody on board with what the changes in Calpads, so you're not alone in your work. And we have some additional downloads and links to useful resources that are timely for this period of the year. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit here at LACOE, former LEA Calpads administrator. I'm joined by Jaime Oliveros. He's our data specialist. And we also have Hillary Weiss on the line. She's a coordinator 3 within our unit. So we encourage you to reach out to us. Our emphasis is on building a culture of data use within LEA. So this Calpads is kind of within our purview. So that's why we facilitate this meeting. And just some housekeeping, just make sure you're muted or remain muted. And primarily we use the chat to post your questions or comments, and we certainly encourage that. And I'm going to talk about the purpose of our meetings in a minute. And I think if you can use the chat as frequently as possible. If you do have a comment, or if we solicit feedback of some sort where you feel the need to speak, it may be more efficient than typing, please raise your hand so we can be orderly about it. And you should see the raise hand button, if you haven't used it before, is down in your reactions button. And we are recording this meeting, and it'll be shared with all the network members. So if you have to leave for any reason or take a call, don't worry about it. It'll be available to you. That doesn't include, however, the vendor breakouts. Those are in their own meeting rooms. And just in terms of the purpose of the Calpads network, we are here to share timely information. We are a supplement. I want to emphasize that we're a supplement to the CDE's quarterly meetings. We're a supplement to the Wednesdays Calpads Q&A every week. We're a supplement to the CSIS trainings. We are not technical experts. Jaime and I were just laughing that half the time, if you've ever attended one of the Calpads Q&As, if Brandy's not there, then the CSIS people can't answer 80% of the questions, so it's like very difficult to answer a lot of the really technical questions that you may have. But we are here to try to connect Calpads professionals, and we've had a lot of success lately when people have had challenges in their LEA, either finding staffing or answering questions or finding support, especially new Calpads users. This network has been extremely generous in providing resources and time to others, and that's really what we're here for, to connect. And so that's ideally what we're going to do today, and also to break down those silos. Like I mentioned, you shouldn't be alone in this process. Who else needs to know at your LEA about changes in Calpads that are going to impact or potentially impact them? So trying to facilitate, pointing you in the right direction of who to share this with. And I know as both an assessment administrator and a state and federal program person and a Calpads person, oftentimes I come back from a meeting with, this is pre-pandemic, of course, with my binder or my handouts, and then they'd go into a file drawer and they wouldn't make it to the right people. So we try to help by pointing you in the right direction. Make sure you let your EL coordinator know about this, or make sure you let your state and federal program person, and they may be hearing it elsewhere, but it's good to hear it multiple times. And then when we do have areas, and we do have one type area like this today, we can do some collective problem solving to help resolve issues that we foresee or that are happening. And we can share that with the group. So we're not always trying to figure out all these problems and their solutions by ourselves. So that's my soapbox for the purpose of our meeting. And let's just jump right into the Calpads quarterly meeting recap. And if you have any thoughts along the way or questions, drop those in the chat, any clarifications. So what we did hear about, we heard about the post redevelopment update, the redesign, so the process that's going to be implemented starting on April 5th. Of course, it's going to lead to this Calpads shutdown between March 30th and April 4th. And just make sure your assessment coordinators know about this. I know that we've sent out this announcement to our district assessment and accountability network to let them know that they needed to be planning on having TOMS updates not happening between March 30th and April 4th, and that they should have all of their enrollment, student demographic, English language acquisition information in Calpads up to the date of March 29th. So they should be aware of this, but I would reinforce this with them to make sure that everything is ready to go for that shutdown, because of course the timing is kind of critical. It's right in the middle, or can be right in the middle of your assessment window for both LPAC and CASP. So you make sure you want that to be clear to people. And I'm sure you are on that. Of course, there will be no, there may be a slight delay for anybody who shows up during those times, of course. So, and if you have changes that need to be made, if there's enrollment records that aren't matching, there will be a delay. So just make sure that, you manage expectations. I'm not going to get deep into the weeds of fall 2 because you're dealing with it right now. Yeah, so Eric, I see that. We'll get to that in a little bit, and I will talk to you about that towards the end. So we will get to the SSID process, and maybe we can get some clarity here from within the group. I did want to point out, though, that the assignment monitoring training is posted, and I say this because I know a lot of you will be involved. Yes, fall 2, the submission process is about to close. I don't think there's much we can do right now to clarify what's going on, but the process is nice in terms of assignment monitoring, which there will be some clarification opportunities. So I would expect that you'll be working with your HR personnel folks to provide clarity to the assignment monitoring authority, which is LACOE. So with the monitoring authority is asking questions, and there are a lot of Calpads errors that you'll be asked to provide some additional clarity. So they have uploaded, there was if you weren't able to attend that assignment monitoring training, it's broken into 2 sections. So it's a little bit easier to navigate. They didn't bookmark it, so you do still have to skim through. But the first half is all the Calpads and CDE people. The second half is the CTC people, who, it's 2 parts of the process that develop CalSAS. So I definitely recommend watching that. I also have on these subsequent slides, we had these last time, but definitely, if you weren't familiar with them, there's some great resources on the CTC website. The assignment monitoring, or the appropriate credentials database, that's a very useful tool to find out what's applicable to which coursework. So definitely recommend checking that out. And then the assignment school training modules. And these are things that, I think this is just an ongoing process. We're going to get closer to better, but one of the things that we are still waiting a data release by the CDE of the teacher assignment data as filtered through the federal definitions of appropriate assignments. So that's different than the CTC's state level, what's allowable, right? And so I think it's only after we see that data that we're going to have a clear picture of how we clear things up. So there's going to be some, I think this is going to be a well promoted release of data. It's going to populate the SARC. They've actually said it would populate the LCAP this year. If you're using the CDE's LCAP portal with the teacher misassignment data, but it's been very confusing. The state changed the definitions of assignments, and there are slightly different variations, whether it's the Williams assignments or SARC or the federal addendum. So we need some clarity on that, but I do want to recommend using these tools over time, because we'll just have to refine our practices. But you as Calpads folks play a big role in this, and so hopefully working with HR and your curriculum and instruction people will be able to get cleaner data going in. And there's just some misassignments you can't avoid. That's just inevitable, particularly with teacher vacancies. We also included, and this was in there before, these are all these resources that we had previously loaded. This came from, these were all in the January 2022 quarterly meeting, but lots of good stuff in here. I definitely have been working. I worked with the teacher equity unit at the CDE recently on another project, and it's trying to understand and stay on top of this is really challenging, but there's a lot of good stuff here that you have access to. Spitfire redesign. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but because they did go over it at the quarterly meeting. So we're looking at a new file format forthcoming in the 22-23 school year. So we've talked about this. They've talked about it several times. Hopefully you took the opportunity to download the draft file specifications that were linked. I think they're in the box, the CDE box at the meeting. But we've also got them in our Canvas meeting today. So the draft file specifications and code sets, these contain all the input validations that are either going to pass a file entirely or reject it entirely. So good things to look at. And you definitely, if you haven't taken a look at those yet, you should after fall 2 gets completed. These are the size and shape validations that are going to be expected for the new file formats. And so they're working on, the CDE is working, and they've got a working group that's working on all the data discrepancies that LEAs we'll see once the data are posted. They're still working on those. They're developing a timeline for the user acceptance testing and training. And there's just more to come. They're proposing these 3 files that will replace the current SPED file. So there's 1 file being replaced by these 3. The SSRV file will mostly remain the same, with the exception of replacing the meeting or amendment identifier now with something called the plan effective start date. So that's going to be key. And the special education status will be eligible and participating, eligible and not participating, not eligible, and eligible and not enrolled. That'll be part of the how you determine the status of a student. We did include, there's a link from the CD box, but as I said, these draft specifications and code sets are uploaded onto our Canvas page. I also uploaded as a special treat slides that I came across that are the special ed redesign working group, that if you're really interested in this, and certainly your special education folks might be, that the last working group meeting gives you a little more detail into the process. And so you may take a look at that. Those are also loaded in our Canvas page. I mean, I haven't looked in the chat at anything specific. Questions about the redesign?
No questions.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. So more to come on that. I think we kind of need to see it before we, I do think I definitely want to make sure your special education staff takes a look at these and your special education data system technicians, so they have a little more understanding of the specifications and code sets, and get feedback. I maybe didn't mention that. Any feedback you have, I can then translate this to the CDE in our county office meetings. So this good stuff, and so we are your voice when we go to these meetings. So make sure if you have any concerns or you see anything that maybe will produce some challenges, to let us know. Okay, so the PEBT program, and we've been talking about this for a while. The plan, which is going into the USDA, is still pending approval. Eric, you raised your hand. I'm going to assume that it might have been related to the last question. So go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm correct on this because we use PowerSchool, and I know there's going to be a vendor meeting after. I talked to them in person, and I asked them to see if they're working on these file formats, and they keep saying there's nothing to do at their end, that they're already extracting the data the way they're expecting. To me, it seems that the data is going to be extracted, the file itself, different fields. And I want to make sure that that is being shared across all the vendors to make sure that they're working on the file format, not only the data. Is that correct, that the file format to get SSIDs will be different?
Okay, thanks for the clarifying. I wasn't sure if you were talking about our PEBT or the last thing, but you're talking about SSIDs.
Correct. That was the previous slide that you have about the formats, and also about the special ed, that the file formats will contain different data.
That's right. So they should be working, the CDs working with the vendors on this. This is out you know, to the 22-23 school year. So when they refine that, that's what I would expect your vendors to have adapted to it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so PEBT program. So again, this is a plan that's still pending approval from USDA, and I will say, I think that there's first to clarify, the USDA is really kind of the determining factor. What we've identified as potential issues probably won't be seen as very valid from the USDA. So basically the feedback that the CD received from LEAs, including you, it was clearly that not a lot of LEAs were reporting or collecting specific COVID absence data, because why would you? You weren't instructed to do so at the beginning of the year. And so in an effort to collect that data for PEBT, so if a student is absent with a COVID related reason, they'd be eligible for the PEBT benefits for the time that they were out. But a majority of LEAs were not, the vast majority of LEAs were not collecting the data, and it doesn't make sense to go back and try to fill that out to determine this was a COVID related absence, this was not. So they decided instead to utilize the stats file. And they're going to be looking at 5 absences within a month as being 5 excused absences as being a proxy for COVID. Now, that's of course not a perfect system, and a lot of the issues with that came up in our COE meeting, like what if a kid was absent the last 3 days of one month and the first 2 days of the next month, you know, so that's not going to get picked up. These are nuances that just, but it's really limiting. So it's a proxy. These absences, excused absences, are going to serve as a proxy for COVID related excuse. And so they were going to look at this using this external system that LEAs will be uploading their data to. We don't have a timeline as the release yet. The plan would have to be officialized. We do know that the LEA Calpads coordinators will be the person who will be given access to that portal. So you'll be notified and you'll be given the login credentials for that. So it will come to you, not to your superintendent or someone else. But the stats file will be uploaded for each month, August through May, and this is for benefits that won't be issued. This is the 21-22 school year. Benefits won't be issued until August or September. So a less than perfect system, but this is kind of what we're stuck with. So some questions.
Kevin, Sue-Ann does have Sue-Ann has a question, and it is the USDA file collection still going to be optional? And if not reported, do you know the consequences for not reporting?
The consequences really would, if you're in a school, let me forward to the next slide for eligibility. So if you don't have any national school lunch program eligible schools, or they're not participating in NSLP, CEP, Provision 2 or 3, then the submission really wouldn't have an impact, because those students at those schools wouldn't be eligible for PEBT. However, if your schools are participating in the school lunch program, then the impact is really more on the individual students who would not be receiving their PEBT benefits. So that's kind of can be pretty consequential. Well, Sue-Ann, I would defer to Brandy if she says it's optional. I'm sure she's saying it's optional within it's optional because, you know, you may not everybody participates in national school lunch program, so they can't enforce it. But it's for those districts where you have a lot of students who may benefit from the PEBT, and you may have a lot of parents asking about that. So this is like one of those little A accountability measures. You'll probably hear from parents more than you're going to hear from the CD. So it's optional, but there would be consequences. Let me go back. Lydia had asked, are the stats file dates correct? Slide showed August 21 last year through May 22 this year. That's correct. The reason being that this is for the benefits. They're going to be retroactively issuing PEBT cards for this year. So students who are participating in in-person instruction, but who are absent will receive these benefits retroactively. And here's the determination. This is an updated, revised flow chart. I think we shared this with you last time. But here's the flow chart. So first of all, you know, to determine whether or not, to Sue-Ann's question, if you're participating in national school lunch program, if your school is or not, that's the first determination. If you're not, then, you know, students aren't eligible for PEBT. So that's the end of the question, right? But if they are participating, and at any time during the month, a student was on an independent study contracted a long-term or short-term, and then you would go to the next flow chart. So if they were participating in the independent study and they had 5 absences, those absences would not be consequential because they're already participating in independent study. They aren't eligible for the PEBT. It's only students who are participating in in-person instruction who would be at the school where they could potentially receive a lunch. However, if a student was enrolled in a CEP Provision 2 or Provision 3 school, and then they would be eligible for receiving those benefits per their 5 absences. So, or if they have the 5 absences. So that's why the stats file is being collected, and we're going to get more. Sue-Ann, that's the reason they're determining. I think I tried to share that earlier, maybe not very eloquently. They're using as a proxy for COVID absences just 5 excused absences. So a student, they can't know for sure that those were, but they're making an assumption, and that's what the state is proposing to the USDA. It has not been approved yet, but they're not asking, knowing that nobody or very few LEAs were using COVID specific absences, or that may have differed from one student information system to another. They're using a proxy, which is 5 excused absences will count within 1 month. So there are some issues with that, but they're trying this, I think, to find some solution that will capture as many students as possible. And given that they were using the criteria that the State Department of Health used for students who had to quarantine. So if it was a mandatory quarantine period, so that's how they figured it would show up in the 5 excused absences. Just checking. James, thank you for clarifying. SPED file formats are changing. SSID request file format does not. Yeah, I was trying to distinguish between the two.
Hey, how are you? I'm just on a training. Just a Calpads regional meeting.
I'm making you mute.
How's it going? Huh?
Thank you. Okay. So a couple things here. related to reclassification, Flash 219 that came out, which provides some guidance related to the collection of or when to reclassify. And the big issue this year is that, in terms of when we will receive the LPAC data, even though the window's open, is that we may not receive LPAC data until June in terms of students' performance on the LPAC, and it's because it's one of the 4 criteria by which a student is reclassified. So what is the process? Should a student, should the data come back if 3 of the 4 criteria were in place for reclassifying a student, and the last thing that they needed was the LPAC results, but we don't get the LPAC results until after the end of the school year, and now you've exited the student. So this is some guidance that the CDE is given. So primarily students should be reclassified, of course, in a timely fashion when they meet all 4 criteria. However, students who are reclassified after the last day of school, if they will not be returning to that school, should have an RFEP date that's equal to the last day of school. Students who are reclassified after the last day of school who will be returning should have an RFEP date equal to the enrollment date for the next school year. This is primarily just to make sure that the data gets assigned, attributed for accountability purposes, gets attributed to the school where they earned this. Yeah, so Sue-Ann, you point out one of the challenges here, which is the process, right? So it's going to be an issue when students change schools and the previous school classified the student as RFEP but did not update their status in Calpads. So that's really going to be an issue in terms of timeliness and making sure that this is completed as often as or as quickly as possible. And the additional piece that was added was related to summer LPAC and the administration of the initial LPAC during the summer. And I know last year, the challenge in generating SSIDs was so great. I had a few LEAs that called and said, maybe we should initiate summer. They had used a summer LPAC administration in prior years, and they were considering doing it again. And so to that end, I think this is a very timely notification just in terms of what's needed for administering an initial LPAC and initial alternate during the summer. So the following data that needs to be included. And then especially if you intend to use the students to send out a student score report, the SSR, the student information file would need to have the student address in order to facilitate the mailing to the parents. One other related fact that I just wanted to share with you related to LPAC and data collection is that we're hearing from ETS folks related to the LPAC that a number of security stairs, the Security Test Administration incident reporting process, they're getting reset appeals for students who have started or completed the summative LPAC testing but have already been reclassified. So while reclassification updates will remove the summative LPAC test eligibility for the students, it takes up to 48 hours for the update to be reflected in TOMS and the student testing interface. So to ensure that students are not tested inadvertently, it's critical that LEAs update the English language acquisition status in Calpads once a student meets reclassification criteria. So what's happening is that the process for reclassifying or just your LEA process, or some LEAs, I'm sure that all of you are really efficient in getting this happen. But if those students are still marked as eligible and they take the initial summative LPAC, it creates an issue, right? So you want to get your students who are reclassified change their language acquisition status prior to the onset of the summative LPAC, lest you get them tested again. And that could create some conflicts here. Let me just add, I wanted to do a quick poll here just to see, if you don't mind just filling this out. So 2 questions here, very simple. One related to the prior slide. Does your LEA plan on administering the initial LPAC and initial alternate LPAC during the summer this year? So if you could respond to that. And then secondly, how frequently do you update the CELA status in Calpads? Just out of curiosity, because I think these are the processes that would create the problem related to students getting identified as eligible. So I'll give you a minute. Okay, it's slowing down. I'm going to hold out. Come on, let's get to 50% response rate. I'm getting there. I need 4 more people to respond. Come on, 2 more. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, you might not know this, but all right, we hit it. I'm going to share. I'm going to end the poll here and share the results. Oh, that's still some more coming in. Okay, let me share your results here. So in response to that first question, does your LEA plan on administering initial LPAC and initial alternate LPAC? So 50% of you have not yet decided or may not know. And of course, this is an administration determination, your assessment coordinator. So I definitely want to bring it to, I would take it, on this last slide, I've said notify your EL coordinators. I should have expanded that to say your LEA LPAC coordinator. They may not be one and the same person, because that person should be thinking now, should we consider administering a summer initial LPAC, and what are the consequences, or what are the challenges we face in doing that? And to the extent that we can have some advantages of having students tested early and avoid all those crunches that we faced last year. Now, having said that, with the new post redesign, and maybe we'll have a easier time at generating the SSIDs, but I think Sue Ann also noted that it's going to tie into the SSID process big time. We will get to that in a little bit, and I'm not sure how long. There's some short-term plans for SSIDs and longer term plans, and I don't know how soon those longer term plans will be in place for how SSIDs are generated, but that's a big factor. Then with regards to the frequency of updating the students' English language acquisition status, so a good chunk of you do at least bi-weekly, so approximately 75%. So an option would just be to as you approach the LPAC summative window, to be a lot more conscientious of it. And of course, the timing of that coincides with fall too. That doesn't make things easy. But this is why this happens, and it does create. And big thing is just to keep the lines of communication open. Does anybody have any other tips or tricks for making sure that their students are eligible for reclassification, are identified and quickly? Does anybody have a system that's really bomb-proof that they're like to share in the chat, or come off mute to share with the group? I'll look for it in the chat here. I'm going to keep moving just out of the interest of time. But if you have something, please let us know. This is another one that I think this dawned on me last year when I first saw the announcement of the seamless summer option. Thank you, Lindy. Yeah, don't be late with the language. It's a nice little mnemonic, I guess. So this information is going to be forthcoming in the Flash 220. That'll be the next flash out. So AB 130 established this California Universal Meals Program, and it's very similar to what happened last summer with last year with the seamless summer option. And the challenge is you're giving free meals to students. So why would parents feel like they had to fill out a National School Lunch Program meal application, which is kind of invasive or can feel intrusive, and the concerns about privacy and other things. And we always had challenges anyway, right? Just getting certain ages of students to fill them out. If they're not taking lunches, if they're not getting the lunches, then they don't tend to fill them out. Oh, thanks, Chris, for sharing that about your RPEP process. Oh, that's great. I have to take a look at your Tableau file and see what that looks like. If we can reproduce something like that. So the 2 free meals being offered starting next year could potentially lead to similar challenges with regards to collecting the necessary documentation for free and reduced price meals, which of course has some impact on LCFF, your Title I allocations to schools. All these things get hammered. So I won't go into the forms. These were in the quarterly meeting update. So, but these are definitely things you want to make sure you share, these tables about who can collect the meal applications. I've had questions related to CEP schools and what they collect, whether alternative forms this year, or do they have to go back to collecting NSLP if they're at the end of their 4-year term? And so these are all answered within these tables. So these are really helpful. But I want to ask a question, and I did send it out. It's kind of late. We sent out a survey yesterday, just asking what you may promote. But let me ask in the chat now, if you could enter the talking points that you have used or might be using next year to encourage families to submit a national school lunch program application. Again, the implications of not receiving this information are that you'll have potentially less supplemental concentration grant funding. You may get a lot of students who are identified through direct certification, but there are still a number of students who aren't. So if you don't have a national school lunch program application on file for these students, if you're just a participating school, not a CEP school where alternate forms work, then it's going to be critical. So let us know, what do you put in the chat? Because what I think we need to do is derive some common talking points that we can share with everybody in the network. And now, granted, you may not be sending these out. However, all right, thank you, Allison. It's not about free lunch. It's about testing, discounts, program funds, etc. Right? Okay. So I think what we're looking to do is compile a list of talking points to share with everyone in the network, so that you can have have a heads up, have a start, so you're not scrambling at the last minute to get families to fill out the national school lunch program. And then you can also target families who have used the form in the past, so that you can maximize your free and reduced price meal applications to get the most LCFF funding that you're entitled to. But also, yes, it is also in the benefit of those students for the other things. So what are some things? I did collect a few, and I'll share them here, but I encourage you to continue dropping ideas in the chat. We will, like I said, compile these. So some of the suggestions that came in through the survey and from others is, we'll pursue families that have been part of free and reduced price meals in the past that haven't submitted the form for the current year, and will likely distribute the NSLP form to all families, part of our data confirmation process for the school year, so that you're kind of pushing it out there anyway, and putting it out in the guise of, we need this for data confirmation. Here's along the lines of what Allison was talking about. In order to receive maximum amount of state funding, our district must have 100% of families complete the form. Yeah, I mean, it's always good to know, hey, we're entitled to this money, but only if you fill out the form. An emphasis on the benefits, for instance, musical programs, extracurriculars, AP, SAT, ACT fee waivers, before and after school programs that are funded. These are all important things for folks to know. Just as general, key is to show plenty of benefits across a wide band to get buy-in from the largest group. Informing families and community about the impact on resources through a variety of communication platforms. So this is more about the how. And then promoting academic achievement and enrichment programs, guidance counselors. Again, this is the benefits they receive or what's funded through their NSLP submissions. Fee waivers, resources for the classroom. Chris notes we still require for our bus program AP testing, ELOP options with daycare. Also share it with district access to other funds to serve your students. Thank you for contributing. Yeah, so we will compile these. We'll definitely send these out to everyone as we get and also share it. It is important for state and federal program directors to know this, because especially with Title I, the districts receive their Title I allocation based on census data, but within the district, having your free and reduced price meal counts accurate at schools is a determination in terms of ranking. And then it's also a factor in terms of equitable services. So the students you're serving at private schools, that's a factor of, it's a calculation that includes basically all the students who are eligible divided by your total allocation, and it'll determine. So if you have fewer students at the school sites filling out national school lunch programs, more money is allocated towards private schools. And not that they don't deserve that, but if it's not accurate, you may be giving a disproportionate amount, in services to your private schools. Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Key is to inform and educate parents of what exactly the funding from this application does. So like I said, we'll develop some talking points and make sure to get those out to you. I also would like to note, thank you for sharing the elevation. And our MOS unit actually came to me with some questions about elevation. I will look into that and find out a little bit more. So you're monitoring Carla, you're monitoring the elevation regularly. Okay, that's another good point. And I think for our EL coordinators to know the conflicts that exist and how to encourage communication with Calpads personnel if they have resources available to them. So everybody's kind of on the same page is great information. Thank you. Here's another one. This is actually pending, but because it has an impact right now, because you're supposed to be changing your enrollment. This is an effort to address the cradle to career system that is coming out. It's bit by bit and will eventually be out there. But in terms of tracking students who are first generation college goers, they're expanding the data collection for parents to both parents. And I believe that currently it draws from the first and second contact or who are tapped in, to include the data for education levels. And there's definitely more to come on this. I don't want to go too into the weeds because there's guidance forthcoming. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And I know Brandy said that she has to work on some communication around this. And I just wanted to put it out there because one of the factors that will have an impact, and this is something that your student services folks will need to know to make sure that it's included on, they've updated their enrollment forms, but also in terms of how this may affect your accountability, like the socioeconomically disadvantaged category includes both students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, as well as parents who who's have a limited, their highest education level is high school or below. So the extent to which now adding a second parent may be a factor in your SED counts is important to be aware of. And one of the factors that they brought up is that if a parent identifies as declined to state, that will default to not SED, right? So it's kind of another thing you want to encourage parents to be honest. And it's I don't know necessarily, it may change your numbers. I don't know this is necessarily a bad thing. Terry, I believe that you would have to go back. That's actually better. I'll hold off on answering that. I will take that to Brandy and the CDE folks. I believe this came up and they put this out there without having all the answers yet. It's either one or the other parent. If either one or the other parent has some college, then that student would no longer be considered SED, or if one or the other parent declines to state, then that student would be no longer considered SED. So it could potentially change your count of socioeconomically disadvantaged, and it would just be good to be aware of why it would change. So when you're sharing data, all of a sudden your SED percentage dropped significantly, to kind of understand what may have been a factor in that. And then hence the reason I say make sure your accountability coordinators know about this change. So more to come on that one. So here's some updates, and we're about to break over. I'm running a little bit late, but just as a reminder, here's kind of our process works. The Calpads folks, CDE, CSIS identify, they come up with some ideas or changes they want to implement. They share that with us in the COE Calpads meeting, which happened last week. I'm going to communicate to you some of those proposed changes. You actually saw some, so both the highest education level and the SPED redesign, I think, are factors that you'll see in the survey that's going to be forthcoming. So you can either provide your feedback now. We save the chat, so everything you record there, we can communicate, but also look for a survey that will be forwarded to you in the next couple weeks. And they will provide this survey for you, and we want to encourage you to respond. And I think I shared last time, I think it was Yolo County. I just like saying Yolo County. It was a smallish county, let's call it that, who, 17 of their districts responded. So they end up having an outsized influence on Calpads, on the decisions that are being made. And so we have so many LEAs here, between our districts and our charter schools, we have close to 500 LEAs. We should be having a really robust participation in this. So hence, I think I want to give you some background, so when you get the survey, you know what you're responding to. And so this then ultimately will influence the CD's decision making, your responses or concerns you may share. So some updated changes. Okay, thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that. EL department is not going to administer initial or summative during the summer. Thank you. Okay, so for 22-23, here's one proposed change. There's going to be a modification of the LCFF report logic for additional transition kinder. So this is actually good news for districts. So in the past, TK was only eligible for LCFF apportionment after their 5th birthday. And so now, as I recall, I'm sorry, I have to check my notes here. So the for the 22-23 school year, if a student is turning 5 by February 1st of 2023, so next year, you can claim apportionment. So you're going to be able to generate apportionment for those TK students who turn 5 by February 1st. So you'll actually, that's a good news, and that's why this is being modified. So you'll know if it's the question that's coming up, you'll know why. Additionally, they're modifying the LCFF report logic for 1.17. And so last year, you may have noticed that some students that had 181 and 182 start dates that were on or after July 1st, but who with program end dates or prior to Census Day were showing up on that report. And that was an error in the logic that was being implemented. So this is really just cleaning that up to correct that error. So now if you have a student whose program exit date for 181 or 182 is prior to Census Date, those students aren't going to show up on that report 1.17 because they're not eligible on Census Day for LCFF. This is another one, and you may have never even heard of this. So there's some, this is Cambridge. It's an online program. It's similar to International Baccalaureate or Advanced Placement. And they've come into California, the California marketplace. I think LA Unified is actually going to be using this system, but you may have never heard of them, but they're proposing adding 120 new course codes for Cambridge specific courses to systems. So you may hear more about that, and just to know what that is. Rebecca, does the slide pertain to the new UTK grade? What's specific universal TK, I think it lowers the age even lower. So if you have TK, just to go back to that slide. So if you have a TK who's currently 4, because I think they're lowering everything, right, with the UTK. So a student who's 4 but will turn 5 by February 1st, that student will be counted in your LCFF apportionment. So you no longer lose the apportionment for that student if they're not 5 by the Census Day. So you can extend it out. I don't know what impact that would have on universal TK. I apologize. And then final proposal, and like I said, this your response to this in the survey that's forthcoming from the CDE will be welcome, and hopefully they'll add any additional sites. But based on a lot of conversations that were happening in the assignment monitoring process and part of fall 2 through CalSAS, there's requests from LEAs for addition of some new non-classroom based or support assignment codes. So proposed codes that they're going to be rolling out would be teacher on special assignment, non-instructional special education case manager, program coordinators at the school site level. So these are other forthcoming changes, and they may ask, do you have any other additional needs? So that would be a good time to voice that, things that you're having trouble with identifying. And that is it for our part of the presentation. Jaime has dropped in the SIS vendor session. Oh, I'm sorry, I almost skipped over the most controversial here. Independent study coordinator, thanks, Chris. So the Calpads Splash communication is being drafted to clarify the new process. And this SSID, it basically, as I understand it, and someone who maybe is a little more into the weeds of this than I am, but the whole process for the existing SSID process is just really intensive. And they're trying to find a way to make the process, it took up a lot of CPU space, a lot of database resources to move through the process. So they're finding a short-term solution. And the short-term solution for SSIDs, and they're making some changes, the underlying fundamental changes to Calpads in the long run, and this is a short-term solution. It's a synchronous incremental step. So these are the proposed changes. So SSID matching on demographics being eliminated. SSIDs will be signed based on blank SSID field and no matching local ID at the LEA in the SCNR file. So there's some mid and long-term solutions being developed to mitigate the risk of assigning mid, so you don't have those multiple identifiers. And that there will be much more communication coming out. This was definitely something that I know that there's a lot of concern. It became a bigger issue, I think, than even the CD expected as per our COA meeting last week. So more to come on that, unless someone has any insights. Chris, yeah, so concerned they haven't thought the new SSID process through fully, and they expect a little chaos when eliminating demographic matching.
Yeah, I'm just not sure they've thought through all the business case studies yet. Not all of us use file uploads to, I mean, a lot of us are just looking up SSIDs, using demographics. And if some of those processes are removed, it's going to throw a wrench in a lot of this stuff. And just a concern. So.
Well, if you or anyone wants to share with me those types of thoughts, I'm happy to forward these to, yeah, Jan, thank you. Kindergarten students with no prior enrollment will be okay, but not transfer students, right? So that's where I think there's the concern. So more to come on this, but yeah, if you have some specific samples as you put it, business rules. Yeah, and Jan, thank you for pointing out the individual lookup will still be available. I think the concern is also just manually entering SSIDs is prone to problems too, but it may be the solution to continue working in that way. Oh, thank you, Sue Ann. I actually was seeing your comments, Sue Ann, on the listserv related to this. Yeah, there's a little tempest in a teapot. I don't think it's actually that. Yeah, Terry, so concerns about a student leaving. Okay, thank you for sharing these. Yeah, and issues with Thompson Stairs will be insane, Sue Ann, thank you. I will take your comments from the chat and I will format them, kind of cluster them and share those with Brandy and CD folks so they are aware of concerns around SSID. I know that they're aware that it's causing a lot of concern among LEAs. But with that, we're going to conclude our portion and send you out to join your SIS vendors. And I appreciate your time. And our next meeting is May. Jaime, do you happen to know it off the top of your head?
May 17th at 9.
May 17th. And the nice thing about that, I apologize for the timing this week landing. We didn't know at the time that was going to land in the final week before Fall 2 certification when we posted it. And we will have more in May because we have a little more time. So we'll have some best practices around end of year processes, end of year updates. We'll have some special education folks to talk about that end of year. So thank you for your joining us today. We appreciate you being part of the network and we'll see you soon.